अस्सलाम वालेकुम एवरीवन, मेरा नाम हया फातिमा इकबाल है और मैं हाजिर हूँ फुलब्राइट वुमेन पॉडकास्ट की एक और एपिसोड के साथ। हमारी आज जो गेस्ट हैं उनका नाम है महरीन खालिद। महरीन likes to go by the name Lali, so we are just going to call her Lali from now on. Lali is an MFA in photography from the Pratt Institute in New York, and currently she is a visiting artist in photography at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. Lali, I hope आप खैरियत से हैं। Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah,
लाली, पहले
thank
तो
you for
आप
having me.
थैंक यू। लाली, पहले तो आप ये बताएं कि आपकी जो एक ज़्यादा काम है, आपका जो स्पेशलाइजेशन है एक तरह से फोटोग्राफी में, वो पोर्ट्रेचर में है, वो पोर्ट्रेट्स बनाने में है, और उस काम के बारे में तो भी हम थोड़ा बाद में बात करेंगे। लेकिन आप ये बताएं कि अगर इस वक्त आपको कोई ऐसा शख्स देख रहा है जो फोटोग्राफर बनना चाहता है, फोटोग्राफी पढ़ना चाहता है, तो किन किन चीजों में स्पेशलाइज किया जा सकता है? वो कौन कौन सी टाइप्स ऑफ फोटोग्राफी हैं या ब्रांचेस ऑफ
Mhm.
फोटोग्राफी हैं जो पढ़ी जा सकती हैं और जिसमें पूरा पूरा एक ब्रांच में करियर बिल्ड किया जा सकता है?
Mm. Okay. Well, there's a lot. So I think for me, मैंने अपना majority पढ़ाई till my undergraduate. I was in Pakistan and I did my undergraduate in printmaking from Lahore, National College of Arts, NCA. And उस जमाने में हम फोटोग्राफी की डिग्री नहीं होती थी। जो हमारी MFA की फाइन आर्ट डिग्री होती थी उसमें 4 स्पेशलाइजेशन थी: प्रिंट मेकिंग, मिनिएचर, स्कल्पचर एंड oh my God, what was the fourth? ऐसा
फाइन
प्रिंट
आर्ट
मेकिंग,
में भी?
मिनिएचर, स्कल्पचर, फाइन आर्ट में भी कैटेगरीज थी। हाँ, प्रिंट मेकिंग, मिनिएचर, स्कल्पचर, there was a fourth one which I'm complete. Oh, painting. I can't believe I forgot painting. Yeah, painting. And I was always interested in photography, so I incorporated photography in my work back then. But I think if somebody is interested in pursuing a degree in photography, there's a lot that they can um, do in terms of, and it varies, like if you're coming, let's suppose you want to get to the US or go abroad somewhere, doesn't have to be the US, and you want to do your undergraduate in photography. A lot of the times with schools, even if your major is photography, you'll get to do a lot of different subjects as liberal arts. So I would really encourage students to, or people who are interested in photography, to take other areas that might coincide with their photographic interests. For example, learn anthropology. What does that mean? What are different social sciences? How can you integrate that within your photographic practice? So on and so forth. With an in photography, it becomes a very specialized degree, right? And when you come to the US in graduate school, it's very, very different. It's not like your undergraduate, क्योंकि undergraduate में होता है आपको बताया जाता है कि जी ये 4 चीजें हैं, आपने ये करनी है, स्पेसिफिक्स होते हैं, कुछ कुछ कोर्सेज आपको इलेक्टिव्स भी लेने होते हैं, सारा कुछ होता है. Grad school is a lot more um, it's based on you as a person, right? So you decide, okay, what subjects am I going to take that are going to help me talk about my photographic practice. So I knew from a very early age that I was interested in portraiture, and I can talk about that later on when we talk about the word, my introduction to photography. And when I started my MFA in photography, I was absolutely clueless as to what direction I wanted to take. Right, so you can, especially in the day and age that we are right now, with AI becoming so important, with all these technological advances, it kind of depends on how you want to take your photographic career forward. So, for example, I consider myself, and I sometimes I don't even like using these words like categorize. अगर किया जाए ना, कहा जाता है एक industry side है photography की, commercial side, and the other is the fine art side, right? Um, and there's a little bit of a divide there sometimes, but a lot of commercial artists right now too. Like, let's suppose you decide, I want to be an editorial photographer, I want to learn how to use lights and everything. You get to do that, and then you can go work with a production or agency or a creative house. So that's a different line. My desire was to go towards a much poorer line, which was become an artist. And it's hard, and it really is, you get a lot of direction when you're in doing an MFA, in terms of people will look at your work, they'll talk about your work, you'll have constant feedback from your uh, peers, you will have feedback from your mentors, you will have feedback from your professors, and you kind of decide what you want to do. Within photography, there are many different genres. Like, I'm a portrait photographer, there's also landscape photography, and all of the genres overlap too. I can make a landscape photograph and say, this is a portrait. That's
Hmm.
my choice of calling it that, right? So it really depends, at the end of the day, it depends on where you are most interested in. If you're interested in pursuing a more studio-like commercial feel to it, then I would encourage people who come here to study to learn how to use lights in the studio, outside the studio, learn how to use all sorts of different lights, and you get access to a lot of great material here. That's like equipment in schools in the US. But I mean, my experience is going to school in the US for grad school, so I had access to all sorts of cameras and lighting equipment. I went for the cameras. I started using medium format cameras and large format cameras because I was interested in portraiture and I wanted to make it a certain way. So I think within photography, it's like, it can branch out and become anything that you want it to become. If I was to really narrow it down and say, okay, specifically, you can do an MFA in photography, um, I wouldn't be able to say you can do it in portraiture only. Does that make sense? Like, I mean, those are different things that you can pursue within your photographic practice, but they will always overlap. And at the end of the day, it depends on what you're trying to say with your work. I think that's the key thing. Like, what are you trying to say? What kind of images are you trying to make? What kind of impact do you want your work to have? So those things are what sort of determine where your work will go. You can decide, right? You can be like, I want to be a street photographer. I want to just use, like, I don't have equipment. I don't have big things. I don't have a fancy school that I'm going to, but I want to say something important about the community that I'm a part of or people that I live with. So you can use your cell phone and go about and like photograph people from the community, right? That's street photography. Or you can decide, I want to set up objects a certain way and talk about composition, lighting, and framing and create still life portraits. So you can do that too. There is always going to be the option of conceptual photographs, which could be anything. It could be the way light falls on a surface and you make a picture like that. You're like, this is my photograph. Or it could be the way a curtain moves when the wind blows, or it could be the way the shadows are on the wall, right? Again, it will tie back always to what you are trying to say through your photographs. And if your work is about time and space, you can photograph pretty much anything, but you have to think about how you're creating that time and space, how you're talking about time being still or moving, and its relationship to where it is within a certain space, whether it is inside or outside or on a wall or on a surface.
फैसिनेटिंग। मुझे ये भी बताएं लाली कि आपने बताया कि जब आप प्रैट गई तो आपने फिर बेसिकली इट्स ऑलमोस्ट लाइक आपने जिस तरफ आपका काम जा रहा था, अगर पोर्ट्रेचर की तरफ जा रहा था, तो उसने आपको पुश किया ये फिगर आउट करने में कि आपको कौन से कैमरा यूज करने चाहिए। और आपकी उस वक्त ऑब्वियसली गुड फॉर्चून ये थी कि एक ऐसा स्टूडियो
हम्म
अवेलेबल था जहाँ पे बहुत से कैमरास अवेलेबल थे। पर अभी आपने थोड़ी
हम्म
देर पहले स्ट्रीट फोटोग्राफी की एग्जांपल दी कि भाई अगर आपके पास बहुत ज्यादा यू यू जस्ट हैव योरसेल्फ एंड
yeah
दिस and you're really wanting to do something in making images and making photos, so आप वो भी कर सकते हैं।
yeah
मुझे ये बताएं कि कितना ही इम्पोर्टेंट है एक लेटेस्ट कैमरा और एक सबसे चिकना किस्म का लेंस होना फोटोग्राफी में, पर कितना इम्पोर्टेंट नहीं है। और अगर वो इम्पोर्टेंट नहीं
हम्म
है तो एक्चुअली क्या इम्पोर्टेंट है इन टर्म्स ऑफ टेक्निकल बिट्स एंड ऑल्सो फीलिंग, सेंटिमेंटल थिंकिंग रिलेटेड थिंग्स अंदर क्या
हम्म
होना चाहिए टू मेक गुड फोटोग्राफी।
absolutely
और
yeah
कितना वरी करना चाहिए कि हमारे पास जो कैमरा है हम उसको उसका बेस्ट यूज क्या कर रहे हैं, और वो कितना
yeah
जरूरी है भी या नहीं है, ये आप बताएं क्योंकि एक्सपर्ट तो आप हैं।
yeah I don't know if I'm an expert, but like I think for me, I learned photography very early on a completely manual, old-timey Canon A1 कैमरा जिसमें इवन फोकस भी ऑटो नहीं था, तो हाथ से फोकस करना होता था। और रील भी 35 mm की फिल्म डला करती थी उस जमाने में। That's the camera that I got introduced to and inherited it from my father. And that was the camera that I used for the longest time. And then when I got into undergraduate and I decided I wanted to incorporate photography in my work, I said, now I need a digital camera. Everybody has a digital camera. But I didn't have the money, so I kept on using that camera for a while. And then eventually I was like, "Acha yaar, I can afford a digital camera. Let me go take this camera to the store. Or isko to main bech rahi hu." Which I feel I regretted so much because it
Yeah.
was such a, it was was a thing that my father gave me. It was a beautiful, shiny silver briefcase. It came with a very shaky tripod, but the pictures always came out great, you know. But us waqt, I was naive and young, and so I got a digital
Going
camera. But
digital.
then, yeah, going digital. But you know, I used that camera till I was in grad school. And even in grad school, I think the first year I was using that, and then I started renting out the medium format camera from the lab. So, and then eventually I got another digital camera. But I have never ever spent too much money on my cameras. If I can get a cheap camera from, or if I can get a really good, uh, shiny, beautiful, advanced camera on rent from somewhere, I'll always go for that because I know as long as we're alive and like there's a new camera in the market every year through every brand, and there's so many brands. There's Canon, there's Sony, there's Nikon. It depends on what brand you like using. So I learned photography on Canon, but I predominantly only use Nikon cameras and Hasselblad cameras now because that's the color that I like. But I feel for me at least, cameras were never that important. I did get lucky in grad school that I had
Right.
access to those cameras, but before that, it was very big cameras. One thing that I did stick with was prime lens, and I'm not saying shallow depth of field because that annoys me sometimes, but prime lens because I really believe that position is where everything happens from in photography. So instead of sitting in your car and zooming the lens and taking a picture, get out, get close to the subject, then take an image, right? So, and when you have prime lenses, you impose a restriction upon yourself, and that's what makes good images, in my opinion. Like I only predominantly use prime lenses. I never use a
Amazing.
zoom lens. And I think so. So I think if you have the sensibility or the understanding of seeing light and observing it, because that, again, so position is where everything happens from in photography. And for me, light is it, right? What is a photograph? It is when light falls on the surface and gets reflected onto the camera lens, and you click the button and record a picture either on the film or on the digital chip. So it really is reliant on your way of looking and your way of seeing how light is falling and following it. So one of the first exercises that I always give my students in class is follow the light. And I tell them, you have one day, you're going to follow the light all day long and make all these pictures and come back and show me images at the end of the day. And at that point, when you're so invested in what you are looking at, you forget about what camera you have. You're looking in the frame, and like if you know how to do the aperture and shutter speed and ISO, right, you can use any camera. Um, so that was one part of the thing. And what was the other thing that you were asking? Oh, and
Like,
yeah, what's the yeah, the subject. So I think so. Yes, you should have a camera that's functional. That's about it. I really am not the kind of photographer who gets a new camera every year.
yeah,
Maybe some people will object to it, but I don't because I
yeah,
don't have the money and I don't believe
exactly.
in spending that much. And I'm like, why? My camera works just fine and
Mm.
it gives me great results. I think the second thing is um, you need to be good at compositional strategies when making an image. You need to be good at looking at what you're going to photograph, and you need to be very much connected to what you're sharing with the world. If you make a picture, anybody can take a photograph of, let's suppose, an orange on a table, right? But if you know that you want people to feel the texture and the color and the flavor of the orange, and you can capture that a certain way, then that's what's the most important thing. A good photograph, and I always say this to my students, will, or any kind of good artwork for that matter, any kind of creative, stimulating thing, would impact one of your five senses. You'd be able to hear it or see it or feel it or touch it or taste it. I have seen photographs where I have smelled the photograph, not because I got close to the print and I smelled it, but it was pictures of these urinals and I saw the photograph and I was, so that's what has to happen. Not that, oh my God, I have a shiny disco camera and I'm going to make $1,000 photograph. Maybe you can, but that's not the idea.
Right.
At least not in my opinion. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Or what should be like, I mean, are there feelings and sentiments we should also be focusing on, like within, like if there's some halchal happening inside, like how can we attune ourselves to listening to those also when we
Mhm.
are making photographs? I mean, we may not feel this uthal puthal all the time before taking every image, but there's some things that we are very close to. There's some people we are really close to. Like, I mean, you could
Yeah,
be
yeah,
covering
yeah,
something very painful, for a documentary
yeah,
photography series, and like you're feeling a certain way.
yeah,
What
yeah,
what can be done with those feelings to make sure that, not to make sure, but to try that they can like spill over
yeah.
into like the work that we do.
Into the world. Yeah. So I think again, one of the things with that is it's different for different people. Like there are many artists that I know of and really admire and appreciate their work who are completely formal artists. I'm not saying that there's no feeling in their work, but I think they rely more on the formal qualities of a photograph, how it's made, what are the rhythms and the harmonies within a photograph. For somebody like me, I predominantly like my connection to photography was empathy. That's how it all started,
Mhm.
and like the images that I seek to make today are based on that very notion. So for me, whatever I'm experiencing, whatever is happening in my life, and I'm not saying, oh, this is my autobiography. Everybody come and let's talk about my life. That's not it. That's not the idea. That's not the intentionality. The intentionality is that people who come and look at the picture, something moves inside of them, right? So if I can channel what I'm feeling, whether it's a feeling of being stuck or a feeling of separation or anxiety or whatever it is, and if I can make an image in that moment, which is how I have dealt with a lot of stuff in my life, I'll go take a photograph. Then it will spill over. Whatever I'm feeling will somehow get manifested in that photograph. I will project it. And then when somebody else comes and sees it, they get to experience that. So I think it's really important to pay attention to those things. Like listen to your own self. Don't rely on one of the problems that, and I mentioned my students, and I'm not saying this in a bad way or anything, but I think one of the problems with the younger generation is the desire to create sensationalized images or to
Mm.
have a certain kind of shock value in the images. And those are all okay things. There's nothing wrong with it. But sometimes so much attention is paid to that what's happening in the sidelines or what's actually happening in the photograph gets ignored. So it's really
Mm.
important to be cognizant of what is it that you are depicting through your photographs. Is it
Mm.
something that's coming from within? Like, and if you are, I mean, I'm older, so it's a different ball game for me. I think when I was in my 20s, I was not like that. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna, but then as you get older, it also kind of changes. Like so many things become so like poignant and profound, and you have to take a moment and like become one with yourself. And I think when you're in that sort of sync with your own feelings and your own internal, external battles, and you can somehow put that into the images, then the magic happens.
And I think obviously, like, I mean, what you make is so much of a reflection of what you are in that point, like what kind of a person
100%.
you have
Yeah.
become. तो वो जो एक
हम्म।
जल्दबाजी वाली तस्वीरें एक खास टाइम
हाँ,
पे
वो
होती
नहीं
हैं,
होती फिर।
ठहराव
या
वाली
या
तस्वीरें किसी और स्टेज पे
वो नहीं
हुई
होता।
होती हैं, and like
या
these
या
stages can also come back sometimes, but obviously I
ओ
think
100%।
it's a full on relation between आप खुद भी आपकी शख्सियत कैसे बदल रही है over time, जो कि बदलती है, and then काम भी definitely बदलता है.
या
um, थोड़ी देर
ओके।
पहले आपने कहा था कि I'm not the photographer. I'm not the kind of photographer who buys a new camera every year, or like
हम्म।
हमारे पास पैसे भी नहीं होते हर वक्त, और you don't
हाँ।
also see the point in it. Do you sometimes see that this is a bit of a gendered problem in the world, where like a lot of like male image makers like talk a lot about specs all the time? Like I see this in film, and it's the gals who are
ऑल द
really
टाइम।
like creating like the sentimental stuff, but the boys are
या
just
या
like कितना bitrate है इसका. I'm just like मुझे नहीं पता.
I don't even care.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to know.
And I don't want to know.
I know.
I think it is a little bit of a gender thing for
Yeah.
sure. And if you look at the history of photography, a lot of the time, so the some of the जो शुरू के photographers थे बहुत सारे predominantly white men थे वो, ठीक है, वो
Mm-hmm.
औरतें नहीं थी, वो
सही
white
में.
men थे, उनके पास पैसा भी था
हम्म.
क्योंकि वो यूरोपियन थे या वेस्टर्न थे
हम्म.
और उनके पास एक्सेस थी। ठीक है,
हम्म.
मैं जिस जमाने में फोटोग्राफी डेवलप हो रही थी एज ए आर्ट फॉर्म और एज अ साइंटिफिक प्रोसेस, उन मटेरियल्स की, उन केमिकल्स की, उन कैमरास की एक्सेसिबिलिटी सिर्फ और सिर्फ एफ्लुएंट सोसाइटीज को थी और एक ये
हम्म.
बहुत बुर्जुआ आर्ट समझा जाता था। मतलब जब शुरू में कैमरे यूज हुए थे ना, तो लार्ज प्लेट्स हुआ करती थी, राइट? उस पर बहुत महंगे केमिकल्स डलते थे और इमेजेस रिकॉर्ड होते थे। उसके बाद मीडियम फॉर्मेट कैमराज आए, उसके बाद जब 35mm कैमरा लोगों ने यूज करने शुरू कर दिया और कैंडिड फोटोग्राफी शुरू हो गई, कोडैक ने इंट्रोड्यूस कराया था, एंड एवरी पर्सन कुड गेट अ कैमरा एंड यूज इट. The ones who were old, the older generation, or the ones who were from a different class, I would say, they sort of look down upon those people, or like ये समझा जाता था कि अच्छा अगर फोटोग्राफी कोई लेमैन कर रहा है तो उसकी अच्छी नहीं होगी, right? Which is funny because a lot of extremely good street photography came from those 35mm cameras. So I think ये जो specs वगैरह की, अभी recently मैं किसी एक उसमें थी, कोई पता नहीं क्या था, कोई podcast नहीं था, कोई क्रिट ग्रुप था कि क्या था, and we were just looking at each other's work and talking about it. And एक बंदा था जो सिर्फ बार बार कैमरे की और डिजिटल और फिल्म के कंपैरिजन की बात करता था. तुम क्या बात कर रहे हो, गेट ओवर इट, लाइक व्हाई इज दैट इम्पोर्टेंट, लाइक व्हाट, एंड हिज वर्क वाज शिट. So I'm sorry, I feel awful, but his work was just like below average, and I'm like, why are you just talking about, oh, there's a big battle between digital and film? Get over it. It's 2023. People are using cell phones. People are using AI to make images. Anybody and anyone can make images. It's all about like thinking about what your image is going to say, thinking about what impact it's going to have, thinking about how long it will last, maybe, or thinking about if it will leave a different document for your generation, for future generations to come and look at, right? So I think ये है. जिस जगह पे अभी मैं हूँ वहां पे मैं इतना ये एक्सपीरियंस ज्यादा नहीं किया, क्योंकि मेरे जो कॉलीग्स, मेरा काफी एज गैप है, एंड लाइक देयर आर SAIC is predominantly a very multidisciplinary. It is a multidisciplinary school. So if you do an MFA here, even if it's photography, you'll get to do all other things which are fantastic. So एक specific camera महंगे वाला होना किसी की भी intentionality नहीं. You know what I mean? Most of my students rent the cameras out, use them, and then make images. And if they decide after graduating that they want to get a hi-fi camera, they'll get it. Otherwise, they'll just use your cell phone. Like, and I have these discussions with my students all the time. Like, one of my students was asking me recently, "Oh, I want to get this camera. It's $5,000." I was like, "Why? You're stupid. You're paying so much in tuition. Why would you go and get a $5,000 camera? Just get a regular camera, man. Like, doesn't matter. Like, just make a good picture." And most of the cameras, including the cameras in our cell phones, do give us the ability to make pretty high quality images.
Yeah. So if we are unable to make like amazing images, then it's a matter of practice and perhaps patience,
100%.
right? मतलब इसका मतलब
Consistency.
camera,
Consistency.
हाँ, right.
It's all, yeah,
हाँ.
it's all about that.
I also want to know, Lali, कि if there's someone watching you who's wanting to become a photographer, they may or may not have access to like photography school or art school, but अभी वो अभी वो किसी भी एज के हो सकते हैं, स्कूल में हो सकते हैं, हाई स्कूल में हो सकते हैं, they don't have to be in school, उनके पास शायद एक
Yeah.
स्मार्टफोन हो, कोई छोटा सा कैमरा हो, किस तरह से कोई अपनी फोटोग्राफी की प्रैक्टिस, मतलब अपने ये तो डेफिनेटली one part of the answer you have already shared, it's about getting out and मोहब्बत से making images every
Yeah.
day and consistency के साथ काम करना. um how do we slowly also try to like find what our style is, क्योंकि जब हम इंस्टाग्राम देखते हैं रोजाना, और इंस्टाग्राम को हम इसलिए मिसाल यूज कर रहे हैं क्योंकि सबसे ज्यादा फोटोग्राफी आई थिंक हम सब बहुत आसानी
उसी
से
पे.
रोजाना उस पर देखते हैं, तो हमें कभी कभी, maybe it's a matter of like following the right accounts also, but like
Yeah.
if we are following our friends mostly and some known people, so it's a lot of like similar kinds of photographs that we keep looking at, right? कि सबकी food photos होंगी, सबकी top से होंगी, थोड़ा curated सब brunch table होगी, सबकी selfies होंगी, बहुत amazing होंगी, nothing against selfies, I love taking them as well, but like
Yeah.
आपको लगता है कि आपको ना कभी कभी एक ही तरह की, like जो तरीका हिट हो जाता है उसी तरीके से हर कोई तस्वीर लेने लगता है, तो हम उनको कंज्यूम करें, बिल्कुल करें, लेकिन हम, I think my confusion is that when those are mostly the kind of images that we are being exposed to, हमारा काम किस तरह से डिफरेंट हो सकता है? अगर हम एक ही तरह का सामान रहे, रोजाना वही खाने की तस्वीरें देख रहे हैं, तो फिर हम उस ऑरेंज को कैसे जबरदस्त तरीके से फोटोग्राफ कर सकते हैं कि उसका रस और उसकी खुशबू और हर चीज हमारे मतलब जहन में आ जाए. तो हमें क्या
Yeah.
डिफरेंटली करना होगा? लाइक वन when we are on Instagram and we are not posting something from our own end, what kind of things can we be looking at that can perhaps broaden
Way of
our
thinking or
yeah,
viewpoint.
yeah,
Yeah.
and also like just like our way of looking at things, because we could be
Yeah, yeah,
looking.
yeah. Okay, so I think there are two different things that you just asked me. So one is looking at the Instagram, then is the access to a camera or not having access to it, and how do you make your own work. So I'll try and talk about them separately. So I feel like the first thing is kind of like I mentioned, um, in order to be a photographer, you just have to do it every day. And I think now I'm at a point in my life where I've been photographing. I mean, I started photographing when I was 13. So it's been many, 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 many years. And I think I'm at a point where I don't feel the need to make a photograph every day. And I'm also not the kind of photographer who gets up with the camera, goes outside, idea comes, and I take a picture. Never, ever happens to me.
Okay.
I have to be a little bit of a what's the word that okay, so this, remember when I was talking to you about following the light? So I basically would observe light and record time, right? So for example, I know that at 3:55 p.m. the light falls at a diagonal 45-degree angle on the wall in my room. So I know that I want to go and sit in that light and make a portrait of myself. So I make these little recordings of, okay, I passed by this shop and there was this light on the wall that I really like. So on a cloudy day, I can go there and still get the yellow of the wall without the light. So this is the time that I'll go there at. So that's how I do it. And that has been helpful because sometimes, and you know, like let's suppose, and I'm talking predominantly about people who would carry a camera. I'm not talking about cell phones right now. Sometimes it's not possible always to have a camera with you and you might not have it. Then, right. It's really helpful to record something that you saw and then go back to the place and create the image. The second thing is like if you're going to be outside with your cell phone, limit yourself. Don't take a picture of everything that you see. That's a problem. That's overabundance of images that then leaves very few things that are admirable or like visually engaging or compelling in any way, right? Um, when I take a picture, I tell myself, okay, I'm gonna go and take a photograph here today, but I can only take 5 photographs of it. And if I don't have my picture within those 5 shots, then I'm not worthy of making that photograph that day. I'm going to walk away and I'll go
Whoa.
back to it. So I think that helps me. And I think that's something that I make my students do too. I make them, they really don't like me for it, but I make them block the backs of their screens, the digital camera, so they can't see what they've just taken a photograph of. So they really have to rely on, aperture, shutter speed, ISO, recording light, learning light, speaking light, you know, like once they get that they can make good images. So imposing restrictions upon yourself is what helps in making images that are worthy of looking at for more than a second. You know, what do we do when we look at our phones on Instagram? We like constantly going कुट 2-2 सेकंड के लिए भी एक इमेज को नहीं देखते. बहुत सारे इमेजेस हैं इंस्टाग्राम पे, लेकिन हम कितने इमेजेस ऐसे हैं जो आपको रोक देते हैं, जिनको आप देखते रहते हो, राइट? तो इमेज के सामने रुकने के लिए बहुत जरूरी है कि आप जब उसको बना रहे हो तो आप सोचें और रुकें तब. Stop before you make the image. Think about it a little bit. And I know, again, this might not apply to everyone. People might be like, hey, I'm an instinctive photographer. I take the camera out everywhere I go and take a picture of everything. And they might be excellent at it.
Right.
But I'm just speaking from my experience. And this is what has worked with me. And this is something that I've made my students do as well. So I think Instagram पे जो आपने बात करी है ना, एक style होता है, right? Something has become popular, that will be the hit thing, and everybody will take photographs like that. There's certain filter that people will apply, really over exaggerate color and the saturation and blah blah blah. I think it's really important to I think Instagram is a great tool for seeing images, but put some limits over there as well. And instead of just one of the things that happened to me when Instagram initially came out, I would sit on it and look at images all day. And this is what I would say to myself: oh my God, I'm a shit artist. Oh my God, look at
Yeah.
how nice this image is. Oh my God, how did they do that? How did they come up with it? And I think that put me in a sort of a paralyzing position where I wasn't really able to make images because I was constantly second guessing myself. So instead, I started following a lot of, instead of just looking at images, I started reading about images. I started reading about people's concepts. So I follow a lot of galleries and museums and artists that I know, like predominantly women photographers whose work I'm really interested in. Women like Sama Al-Shabi, who's a Middle Eastern artist, US based. She lives in Tucson. There is Priya Kamli, who is also a South Asian artist. So I look at works where artists are not posting a new image every day, but they're also talking about the practice of image making, right? But they're not saying, oh my God, let me show you how to make a great image by applying these three things and then you'll be a hit. Because it doesn't matter. It's already been done, right? So you have to kind of decide what what are you going to follow and how are you going to develop your own style and your own language. And the only way that you can develop it is if you've seen and read about enough work that's being made in the contemporary art world. No idea is a new idea. Most of the things that we talk about have been talked about. How do you bring attention to it in your work is through the language that you're using, whether that is verbal language, whether that is written language, whether that is image language. So in order to have a vocabulary to talk about your work, you need to learn the vocabulary to talk about it. And the way to learn it is not Instagram. Strictly speaking, like there are many other things too. But if you're gonna follow accounts, I'd really recommend following, like look up work at that different photography galleries are posting. And I'm not saying that all of it is going to be good work and work that you read, but you'll know what artists are doing, what are the themes that they're working with, and that might send you in the right direction.
Right, right. And sometimes, like a bunch of photographers are working on the same theme, but उससे ये भी देखने को मिलता है ना कि एक different artist उसी theme को कैसे लेके चलता है और कोई और उसको
बिल्कुल
कैसे उस पर
बिल्कुल
काम करता है.
कैसे या तो बेसिकली तो आपकी सोच है ना, एंड में सोच तो एक चीज होगी, लेकिन फिर
हाँ,
आपका वे ऑफ सीइंग है। तो आपने अपने वे ऑफ सीइंग को रिफाइन करने के लिए चीजों को इस तरह से देखना है कि दे बिकम द फूड फॉर योर ब्रेन एंड योर आईज, नॉट समथिंग दैट गिव्स यू एंजाइटी। And that's what I'm talking like, and that's what
right,
it happens with
हाँ,
Instagram. You see so
हाँ,
much like वो क्या कहते हैं, shebang type
हाँ,
होता है
हाँ,
ना, shiny,
हंगामा
and
मचा
you're
हुआ
like
है और
हाँ
उसको
हाँ
हाँ,
हाँ हाँ,
हाँ, हाँ,
and content फिर फ्लैट हो जाता है ना थोड़ी देर बाद।
बिल्कुल.
इट्स द सेम
और
थिंग दैट यू सीइंग ओवर एंड ओवर अगेन।
मुझे तो ये भी लगता है लाली कि मुझे तो कभी कभी ये लगता है, बहुत एक सेल्फिश की बात है, लेकिन मुझे बहुत खुशी है इस बात की कि जब मैं 15 साल की थी तो इंस्टाग्राम नहीं था. क्योंकि मुझे तो परपेचुअली सिर्फ अपने ऊपर थूकने का दिल चाहता है कि मुझे एक भी तस्वीर लेनी नहीं आती और मुझे बिल्कुल
बिल्कुल
वीडियो
या
नहीं बनानी आती, क्योंकि आप इतना ज्यादा अच्छा, मजे का, इंटरेस्टिंग चीजें देख रहे होते हैं. वेल लाइक चाहे फिल्टर्स भी लगे हुए हो, बट लाइक इमेजेस दैट लुक सो वेल डन एंड सो पॉलिश्ड,
या
राइट, कि आप बहुत आराम से
या
ओवरवेलम हो सकते हैं. और मतलब वो लोग, वो यंग एस्पायरिंग फोटोग्राफर्स जो इस वक्त 13 साल के हैं, 15 साल के हैं, जो कि कुछ करना चाहते हैं, मतलब ये तो, यानी अब जाहिर है इंस्टाग्राम को हम बंद नहीं कर सकते ना, हमारी कोई नियत है उसको
नो नो,
बंद
नॉट
करने.
एट ऑल, नॉट एट ऑल या
But I really, I don't even, I don't feel like I feel sorry for younger people,
या
because they are born in a world where they're seeing so much stuff, and then and then we also keep hearing news about how this photo went viral, and then the photographer
या
got this and the photographer was only 18, right? तो आपको
या
एकदम से ये भी लगता है कि शायद अच्छी तस्वीर बनाने से क्विक रिवॉर्ड भी मिलना चाहिए जरूरी, जो कि
या
शायद मेरे और आपके टाइम में इतना फौरन से कोई सवाब या गुनाह नहीं
कौन सा
मिलता था.
रिवॉर्ड यार, अभी भी
कुछ
नहीं मिला, अभी भी
अभी
इंतजार ही कर रहे हैं, कोई
इंतजार ही कर
रिवॉर्ड
रहे
आ रहा है।
हैं. कोई
कब
आ ही नहीं
आएगा? आ जाएगा या
रहा. आ ही जाए, अब तो आ जाए.
या
आई ऑल्सो वॉन्ट टू नो लाली कि आप एज मच एज आई नो, यू आर very I think invested in talking about, and also like perhaps like practicing the idea of like decolonizing photography, questioning the centuries long Western gaze into our worlds. हमारी जो दुनियाएं हैं, ब्राउन लोगों की, साउथ एशियन लोगों की, मुसलमान लोगों की, चाहे वो यहाँ पे रहते हो, अमेरिका में रहते हो, अपनी अपनी धरतियों पे रहते हो, लेकिन आप उसको क्वेश्चन कर रही हैं कि फोटोग्राफी में ये सारे आइडियाज किस तरह से प्रिवेल करते हैं. अ, मुझे आप थोड़ा सा ये बताएं. आई मीन, एक तो आई थिंक generally, I think I'll ask two questions together. The first part
ओके।
of the question is, um, what made you become interested in this, or what forced you to think about this more and to be more vocal about it? क्या हो रहा था आपके इर्द गिर्द, चाहे फोटोग्राफी वर्ल्ड में, चाहे दुनिया में, आपकी अपनी दुनिया में, जिसने आपको मजबूर किया कि आप अब इस बात को कहीं बगैर अब आप रह नहीं सकती, राइट? एंड द सेकंड पार्ट ऑफ द क्वेश्चन इज, हमें मुझे लगता है, एंड इट्स अ वेरी ओवर सिंपलिस्टिक व्यू ऑफ थिंग्स, मुझे कभी कभी लगता है कि वेस्टर्न गेज को गेज करना, उसको किसी पीस ऑफ फोटोग्राफी में ढूंढना, एक कॉलोनाइज मेंटालिटी को किसी तस्वीर में ढूंढना, मुझे लगता है कि कभी कभी ना हमें कभी मुश्किल लगता है, क्योंकि तस्वीरें बड़ी डिसेप्टिव होती हैं। तस्वीर
Mm-hmm.
खूबसूरत हो सकती है लेकिन साथ में प्रॉब्लमैटिक भी हो सकती है, राइट?
Mm-hmm.
तो कभी कभी
Mm-hmm.
तस्वीर की खूबसूरती इतनी अमेजिंग होती है, इतनी पुरकशिश होती है कि हम नहीं याद रख रख पाते हम कि इसको शायद हमें थोड़ा सा इसके बारे में एक आध सवाल भी शायद उठाने चाहिए थे। वेयर एज जब
Yeah.
हम किसी पीस ऑफ टेक्स्ट को पढ़ते हैं, आई थिंक मे बी उसकी वजह ये है कि हम बचपन से पढ़ने से ही, मतलब स्कूल में पढ़ते ही हैं या जो भी करते हैं, तो शायद एक पॉइंट पे जाके हमें अम, कोई वेस्टर्न गेज वाला टेक्स्ट हो या किसी डॉक्यूमेंट्री में या न्यूज में कोई वॉइस ओवर हो जो पाकिस्तान को कहे इस्लामिस्ट पाकिस्तान, तो हमें फौरन से ना गुस्सा
Yeah.
आता है, हम कहते हैं कि ये बकवास कर रही है, ये बकवास कर रहा
हाँ,
है। लेकिन
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल।
तस्वीर में मामला थोड़ा कंफ्यूजिंग हो जाता है, क्योंकि तस्वीर बहुत फिट लग सकती है एंड इट कैन बी
हम्म
प्रॉब्लमैटिक, वेयर एज
हम्म
problematic words often just sound like problematic words, at least जिस तरह दुनिया ऑपरेट करी है हमें,
They're more
मतलब
direct. Yeah.
they're more direct, we can feel it a little
Yeah.
bit quickly. So
Yeah.
second part of the question ये है कि भाई इस दुनिया में जहाँ पर हर तरह की problematic photography भी हो रही है और वो बहुत beautiful looking भी है, um, uh, like are there ways to figure out if something is actually
Mhm.
problematic or not? If we are feeling in awe of a photograph 90%, but 5% of us is feeling a little bit queasy, but we don't know quite what the problem is with the photograph, how can we
Yeah.
train ourselves to at least try to figure out what the problem could be? It's not like going on Instagram and doing a photographer's takedown necessarily, but in our
Yeah.
usual practice of looking at photography, हम कैसे फिगर आउट कर सकते हैं कि ओ ये तस्वीर बहुत खूबसूरत है बट मुझे इसमें ये रिप्रेजेंटेशन थोड़ी सी ऑफ लग रही है, हम अपने आप को
Mhm.
ट्रेन कैसे करें? ये नहीं कि मीन
Mhm.
मेख निकालने के लिए हम बैठें कि आज हम क्रिटिक करेंगे गोरा मैन की
हाँ हाँ
फोटोग्राफी को, बट
हाँ हाँ
किस
हाँ
तरह
हाँ।
से हम प्रैक्टिस में आए?
करनी हर रोज चाहिए वैसे गोरा मैन की
ओके,
फोटोग्राफी खुद
ओके,
की।
गुड, ओके, गुड, now we
ओके।
have the license from
Yeah.
you, we will hereby take
Yeah.
it and use
Yeah. 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 Should
it.
do it. So I think I'm gonna talk about the first part of it. So I think predominantly my work is interested in, it's very much focused on issues of immigration, fluid identities, imagination of diversity, and the perception of home and diaspora, right? And when I was introduced to photography when I was 13 years or much. I started using a camera when I was 13, but some of my earliest memories are images that my father made of our family. So I'd see him set up this same camera that I spoke about earlier in the interview, set it up and record pictures. So I saw the whole process. I'd see him record it, and then immediately I'd see images of people that I loved reflected in those photographs, right? And from then on, I sort of wondered how I could make photographs that would reflect people that I loved, or find that connection. My connection in photography was emotional immediately, right? And I think when I moved to the US, it was one of the hardest things for me because in Pakistan, I'd done some self portraiture, but I was immediately out of undergraduate. I was working with United Nations Development Program, um, and I was predominantly a photojournalist. And I stopped doing it because I mean, it was for a project, and I worked with them for 2 years, and I think that the images were used to help and support the lower income groups and give them नेचुरल गैस के सिलेंडर उस जमाने में आए थे जो उनके हमने सीएनजी रिक्शों में लगाए थे। ठीक है, लेकिन मैं डिफरेंट कम्युनिटीज में जाके इन लोगों को फोटोग्राफ किया करती थी, एंड दिस इज ऑल लाइक below the poverty line communities in Pakistan. And I felt like I couldn't justify me coming from a privileged place. And remember this because I'm going to tie the next question to it. Sitting in my car, going and taking a picture of a person, then sitting in the car back again, going and sleeping in my bed, while knowing that these people चारपाई भी नहीं है, टेंटों में बैठे हुए, कपड़े भी नहीं है, and I felt like I didn't have a right, right? I kept on thinking, how is my work affecting any sort of change? And so when I came to the US, I photographed everything. I photographed the streets of New York City. I photographed billboards. I photographed the bathtubs on the streets. I photographed the piles of trash that you see in New York City. And nothing did anything to me. Like nothing resonated or did anything. And this is all this time, there were comments like this happening in my at art school, how do you speak in English so well? Well, how did you play outside in Pakistan? What about the terrorists? So all those questions kind of evoke this desire to make images that spoke about these things, to present a different identity than the one that they have established in their heads. Because historically, if you look at images that came from the colonizers, right? The West and the European nations had access to cameras. They would go to poor countries like ours or India or Bangladesh, anywhere, go take pictures and bring them back as souvenirs. So what, and they considered us, and Edward Said, who is a very, very famous writer, scholar, critic, philosopher, his book came out in 1978 called Orientalism. He talks about how the West, through its understanding, has fabricated this view that the Western societies are superior to the Eastern ones, and thereby projecting an image of the Eastern societies that's barbaric, uncivilized, and something that can be dissected then according to their needs and pleasures. So all of this, so when I was in grad school, I started discovering this, right? And I was like, okay, I can't be a participant of this. I cannot still have, in 2007 is when I was in grad school, have these questions be asked of me, like, what do you mean? How do I speak English? Do you know the history of Pakistan? Do you know who we are? How can you assume this about me? So I think जब फिर कुछ connection नहीं हो रही थी काम में, समझ नहीं आ रहा था. And in one of the accidental pictures, not accidental, I mean, I sat in the picture myself. My first self-portrait, I made it, and that connection that had been missing since I came to the US was immediately there. That connection was me. I was the one who could bring the entire environment of being in the US and talk about the idea of home and what were some of the cultural conflicts that I was going through as a immigrant student, Fulbright student, who knew that she was going to go back. So I started meeting other people and talking about that. So, and then for a very long time, it was based on, and it still is, home is still a big part of my work. But I think my work has gotten so much more confrontational and talks about the idea of representation very deliberately now in the work. Some of my earlier self-portraits, I always hid my face, like shied away from the camera, or I was kind of disappearing in the shadows. But now I face the camera a lot of the times. So I think the desire to make this kind of work, or for it to happen, it was pretty natural of a process for me. But more important than anything else, it was based on the idea of changing the myopic representation of South Asian, particularly women, is what I focus on. But my more recent work also has a lot of South Asian men in it too, South Asian, Arab, Middle Eastern men. But the idea was to kind of challenge the myopic representation of women that exists, right? If you look at the history of cinema and photography, more than 70% of the characters who would appear in films in Muslim, what's the word that I'm looking for? 78% of the Muslim characters that would appear in film would be men. And then very few women would appear. And even if those women would come up on screen, they would be the oppressed women, right? So as a student who was super vocal, I am extremely opinionated. I've never held my tongue, never did it in Pakistan, never done it here. Like, I can't do it. I'm incapable of doing it. That's why the society deemed me as, oh, you should not be part of here. But I think for me, the idea was, why do you look at me and think I should either be rescued from an oppressed society, or I was not oppressed. I mean, yes, I do come from a privileged house in Pakistan. I do have that, but Pakistan is a very different Pakistan today. A lot of women have a lot of access to a lot of things. I'm not saying this is the picture for all the women. There's still a lot of problems that should be talked about. But when that becomes the only representation that exists, that's when it's problematic, right? Like, okay, either you're oppressed, let me rescue you, or you're an inhabitant of the harem who's then available for everyone. I'm not that woman. So my क्योंकि historically अगर आप देखो तो यही है ना, या तो आप harem में बैठे हो जो आप available हो, आ जाओ जिसने भी आना है, और या फिर आप को बचाना है, घोड़े पे आएगा आपका हीरो आपको बचाने. Let me, and I swear to you, I had class fellows who would say stuff like this to me. Don't you feel a warm, fuzzy thing in your heart now that you're in the US? Don't you feel safe? And I'm like, what do you? So I have never felt more, I've never felt less free in some aspects and ways because I got stuck in the legal system in the US because of my custody and everything. Then I was more free in Pakistan. So I think
Yeah.
all those things kind of pushed my work in this direction. And I think now it is a lot more of it is I want to leave a different document for my son to have. I want him to know that South Asian women are not this single representation that has existed. Pick up any history of photo book.
Yeah.
Look at the images of South Asian women that are there. या उन्होंने veil पहनी हुई है या उनके अगर आप slaves की तस्वीरें देखें, if you look at African people, they only represented in photographs that were taken without their consent,
Right.
in which their clothes were taken off and they were made to look in the camera. The only opportunity that they were given to actually look up was by force. कि देखो और अब कैमरे में देखो, you know. So I want to challenge that representation क्योंकि मुझे ये लगता है कि आज के students को if in 2003 if I'm teaching my students about a more just, equal, inclusive society and I'm showing them these I'm not saying I shouldn't talk about these images. I will always talk about them, and when I show them I make them very small on the screen so my students can see that. But if I'm telling them, okay, this is the representation, you know, they went to India and they took these pictures and they brought them back, I'm telling them, okay, so this is the representation that existed, and it's still, I'm instilling that idea. I don't want to talk about that. I want to have a new representation. So that's why the work is in that direction. And when you talk about the colonial gaze and you talk about the Western gaze, I think you have to be very careful about who's taking the picture. सबसे बड़ी प्रॉब्लम ये है कि फोटोग्राफी के ऊपर आई वेस्ट से थी और ज्यादातर गोरे थे और उनको लगा था कि उनका राइट है कि वो कर सकते हैं, यू नो. बट जब आप प्लीज ना भूलें कि हिस्टोरिकली जब हम लोग कॉलोनाइज थे तो वी डिड एवरीथिंग वी कुड हैव टू प्लीज द गोरास because we wanted to be in their good books. We learned to speak in English. We would dress in Western ways, and we wanted to adopt certain things because we wanted to have a harmonious life as well, or we were scared or whatever, right? तो वो एक बंदा जो एक सोसाइटी का पार्ट नहीं. मैं आपको ये बात यूएनडीपी की इसलिए बता रही थी कि आई एम फ्रॉम पाकिस्तान. आई हैव लिव्ड देयर माय होल लाइफ. I still consider, I don't call myself an American. I can't. It's very, although I am an American citizen and whatever, it's very hard for me to say that. Like somebody asked me, the first thing that comes out, I'm Pakistani, right? Even being from Pakistan, I had a hard time to go and photograph the lower income groups because I thought I didn't have a right to do it.
Right.
And even if as a person from the same country, same religion, same people, whatever, even if I do have a right, I feel like my photographs at that point didn't do enough to bring about a change. Although these photographs were used with UNDP and money was given to the people, I didn't think it was enough, right? So for me, I think it's really, really important. And I'm very critical of a lot of images that get made by people who are not from a community. And we were talking about this one artist. I don't know if I can take his name or not, but the famous Afghan girl photograph is one of the most problematic photographs ever. It was taken without the consent of the girl. It was taken for the benefit of the photographer. And yes, it's a mesmerizing image.
It's an absolutely mesmerizing photograph.
Yeah.
Which is why
but
it's
you
so
don't
confusing.
have a right.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be, you kind of said that, how do we learn to see these images or dissect? I think you have to be very, very conscious of who the photographer is, what is the intention behind it, how is it benefiting the person who's been photographed. You cannot be and this, I've always stuck with this, and I've had many arguments with many people because a lot of big masters have gone to communities that they're not a part of, made amazing work, brought it forward. But I'm always like, okay, what are you doing for them? What did it do? James Nachway, who's a very famous war photographer, photojournalist, he goes to all these areas. Like he's been to Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, India, everywhere in the jails and everything. But Indonesia, he photographed this guy who had no limbs at all, and he was sitting at the shore, next to a water body. I can't remember if it was a lake or a river, and was bathing his children. He made that image, brought it here, collected the money, and then sent it to that guy. So that did something for the person, right? So then I know that image wasn't made and then printed in a shiny, like, I think when you start focusing on how beautifully an image can be printed technically and you pay attention to that rather than what's happening in the subject, it's very problematic. you're paying attention to the color, you're paying attention to how it's done. You're not thinking about who the person is.
The
You
human.
have to think about who the human is. Yeah.
Hmm.
And you have to question it. Like, क्यों एक बंदा जो एक कम्युनिटी का मेंबर नहीं है, जो
Hmm.
अमीर है, जिसके पास एक जहाज है, जिसमें वो
हाँ
बैठ के जा रहा है, पहले ड्रोन भेज रहा है, फिर तस्वीरें
हाँ
खींच रहा है,
हाँ,
उसको कोई
उसको
हक
जबान
नहीं
भी
है।
नहीं आती, उसके साथ हमेशा साइड में साथ में एक, अगर
कोई बंदा
पाकिस्तान में तो
होता है,
एक जिसको फिक्सर कहा जाता है, उसका एक घटिया सा नाम उसको दिया जाता है फिक्सर, उसके एक
फिक्सर।
चौथाई उसको पैसे मिलते हैं डे रेट में, जो सीनियर फोटोग्राफर साहब का होता है, और आधे से ज्यादा काम वो कर रहा होता है उनके लिए, टू मेक श्योर दैट द पर्सन एक्चुअली फाइनली टेक्स द पिक्चर,
या
एंड देन
या
वाह वाह जो है वो
या
एक शख्स की होती है, एंड
उसको, yeah. And I think you just like, I think it's also a learned behavior as well. Like you have to, we have been used to certain images. We've been used to certain, like that's what I said. We did everything we could have to please
राइट
the colonizers,
राइट राइट
right?
राइट, एंड
But not anymore. They shouldn't
हाँ
question it,
हाँ
ask it. Like मैं अब मेरा बेटा 11 साल का है, मैं उसको अभी से सब बातें कहती हूँ. I think ask, somebody says something like this. If somebody doesn't say your name right, ask them why. Why
हाँ
can't you say it right? Am I not
हाँ
calling you what your name is?
हाँ
Learn it.
हाँ
Like, why did we have to do everything? I mean, मुझे पता है कि हम अंग्रेजी में बहुत बात में ये बात नहीं कह रही हूँ. और मैं तो रहती भी अमेरिका में हूँ ना, तो मैं तो एक अजीब ही
कंफ्यूजन
stuck in the
में
middle forever. Huh. So
हाँ
I that's why a lot of my
हाँ
work talks about the issues of immigration. I mean,
राइट
I immigrated because of certain personal reasons, and now I cannot leave because of certain personal reasons.
राइट
But
राइट
that does not mean, when I go to Pakistan, I constantly miss Pakistan all the time, right? And more than me, my son misses Pakistan all the time. But it's not always, and I try and go every year. But when I'm in Pakistan, I feel like a stranger sometimes. And when I'm here, I'm constantly missing it. So there is this, you're stuck. The pendulum swings back and forth where you're like, Acha, am I at home there or am I at home here? And for me, that's why I talk about home in my work. Like the idea of home became my kid. Like
राइट
whenever I'm with my kid, I feel the most at home. So it really doesn't matter. The place stopped mattering to me after that. Yeah. So anyway, so going back to, like, when you're looking at such images, question, ask who made it, what was the intention, how is it benefiting the person in it, what about the human, what about the affect that it might have on a larger scale. Is it going to start a dialogue? Is it going to get people to think more about communities who are affected by floods, let's suppose, or something? Or is it just going to be a beautifully printed image on a gallery wall that everybody would stand in front of, have a glass of wine, and be like, okay, this is great, let's move on.
हाँ हाँ
So you
हाँ
have to be really cognizant of all these things. अगर आप aware नहीं हो तो फिर आप देखोगे भी नहीं.
राइट.
और आपको, मेरा ख्याल में सबसे important बात ये है कि criticize करने से डरना नहीं चाहिए. हम डरते
हाँ, ये
बहुत
थोड़ा स्केरी
हैं.
होता है, डेफिनेटली स्केरी होता है, आपको लगता है कि काम ना छिन जाए, कोई कोलैबोरेशन ना खत्म हो जाए.
हाँ,
आई थिंक बहुत ही एक
कैंसल
वैसे
ना हो जाए. कैंसल कल्चर भी तो है ना बहुत ज्यादा.
कैंसिल का भी है.
बट आई थिंक, या, बट आई
डर
फील
ये भी
लाइक,
लगता है कि आपको एंग्री ब्राउन वुमन, एंग्री ब्राउन पर्सन ना समझा जाए
कट
कि
लेबल ना लग जाए.
ये तो वही है जिनको हमेशा गोरों की बस तकलीफ आई हुई होती है कि तो
हाँ.
दिस इज ग्रेट, लाइक दिस इज ग्रेट एजुकेशन, लाली. आई मीन आई एम रियली
ओके.
थैंकफुल टू यू फॉर दिस.
थैंक यू.
आई ऑल्सो वुड लव टू नो कि आपका आपका अपना जो काम है फोटोग्राफी का, वो ओवर द इयर्स किस तरह से इवॉल्व हुआ है, उसमें किस तरह की चेंजेस आए हैं, और yeah, like looking back and looking at your work now, like what has evolved and why do you think it has evolved the way it
So I think I kind of mentioned that too, but the earlier, so I think one of my strengths is portraiture and predominantly self-portraiture. I started self-portraiture in 2007 and I'm still doing it.
has? Amazing.
That's my fallback. I always rely on it because I'm always available for myself. I don't have to chase people down and be like, hey, yaar, मैं आपको कब photograph कर सकती हूँ? I know that if I want to photograph myself, I'm here. But I think the self has changed, like, kind of, we were talking about it. I have changed. We change on a daily basis. Kind of like snakes shed their skins. We are constantly regenerating new cells, and it's a process of getting evolved. My self-portraiture, the way that it was done in the beginning, was very hesitant, because it was a new thing that I was trying, right? And I was extremely self-conscious because कैमरे के सामने आपको सिर्फ अच्छा लगना या ये सोच आती थी ना कि how do you look in front of the camera. So I had to
हाँ
completely let go of that. One of the things that really did it for me is like one of my peers saw not peers, one of my professors in grad school saw one of the pictures that I made, and he said, "You make the most beautifully sad photographs." And I was like, "Oh my God, like that's what it is." Because I'm really, in a weird way, I'm a sucker for sadness, and I don't think sadness means you sit and cry, which Pakistan में समझते sadness से भी है, but there is an inherent kind of sort of sadness of humans that is inside of all of us, which compels you to think a little bit more, or to be more sensitive to certain things, or to um what's the word that I'm looking for, to internalize, or to make more work. For me, it functioned like that. So I think those self-portraits, the ones in the beginning, were very cautious. I was I was very much aware that I'm behind the camera, but I'm also in front of the camera. And then there's the camera itself. So there's a triangular relationship between us, the three of us. So I would step away from behind the camera and come and sit in front of it, knowing the entire time that, okay, it is me who's there, who focused it, and now it's me here. Um, but over the years, I think it, feel like my work, since it talks about fluid identity, my identity constantly changes. I came to grad school here, started doing those portraits, and after 2 years, I was like, oh my God, now my time is up. I have to go back. But I also met this guy that I was going to end up marrying. So both of us went to Pakistan, got married. It became a completely different situation at that point. And then I was in Pakistan for 3 years. My now ex-husband, back then my husband, moved back to the US. I came after a year of not seeing him, and then I my introduction to the US was New York City. So New York City is different than any place else in the US. You think
Absolutely.
the rest of the US is like that, लेकिन बात मतलब कोई scene ही नहीं.
Seen.
Okay, rest of the US is like, oh, like I'm in Chicago now, and I think this is the second city where I've loved living.
Hmm.
So I ended up living in smaller towns in the US, and it was a challenging time for me because I felt so weird about leaving my home, Pakistan behind, because when I left the second time from Pakistan after fulfilling my Fulbright thing, I said, oh my God, now I'm leaving forever. And
Right.
it was a huge, and it created this sort of a shift. So those portraits also, started becoming more light. There was always darkness in my earlier self-portraiture. So these ones started becoming light, but I was still kind of like turning away from the camera. And then I became pregnant, and sort of completely changed. And self-portraiture changed. I became a different person. I photographed myself a lot when I was pregnant, but then I had my kid, and the idea of home that I talk about was, it's hard to explain, because I think I kind of stepped outside of my body and saw that from outside, and then went back in my body, and I was like, oh my God, this is what my life is. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do? So my son was um constantly in my arms, and like I was constantly attached to him. So it was very hard to make images without him being in the pictures. So he
Mhm.
started becoming an important part of my work. And so then the self was also transforming. And then my divorce happened, so the self kind of changed. And I did a lot of like collaborative work back then. And I did a lot of photo transfers where I was kind of removing the self. And then lots of pictures of my son and I. And then that sort of continued. I think the self along with my son and I started happening 2013 when I started my dupatta series, where I throw dupatta up in the air. That was
Mhm.
also started with Azan, because he and I were walking on the beach. He was in a stroller, and I ran to make a picture. And actually, I was wearing this very
Oh.
chadar, and I have a lot of dupattas. And as I ran to get in the picture, I wanted a picture of me on the lake shore, on the ocean shore.
Mhm.
And this was in South Carolina, I think.
Mhm.
And I was wearing this, and I was really hot, and I threw the dupatta up in the air, and it got caught, and I was like, oh my God, the self is transforming now. So it became a symbol of, this was the first time I was doing sort of conceptual self-portrait. So it became a symbol of home. It's a reminder of mom for me.
Mhm.
It can be taken in both ways. It can be seen as something that's suffocating you or overpowering you, but it's also can be seen as last shred of my cultures that I take with me. It's
Mhm.
something that's liberating. It's something that's like constricting. So that became that. So I started doing those. And then uh, I think I still do the dupatta shots, but I don't do them as frequently. The project is still ongoing. Maybe it will change. Maybe it will just finish. And I
Yeah.
think the more recent works then became about my legal battle for custody, my work in contempt. that body of work happened. And then I started working on the idea of Western gaze. I mean, people look at you in Pakistan all the time, but from an object of desire, when you come to the US, you become the box of representation that exists in their head. So my son and I started making these Western painting, kind of like vaguely copying them.
Mhm.
And then I would see him only 6 days in a 6 overnights in a month. That's what the court gave me. And that like started this. So again, the self was changing, transformed, becoming something else. I'm like, oh my God, my only sense of feeling at home and grounded and still has been taken away from me. So what do I do now? And I think I would have gone crazy had I not taken pictures, because it was one
Mm.
of the hardest times of my life. I mean, and still I'm going through it. But now my kid is, mashallah, 11, and things are changing. I'm much closer to him in distance than where it was before. And I get all the summer, and he's with me for the winter break and everything. So that work was specifically uh, union and separation. So it was union. Whenever Azan and I were together, I would take a picture based on the Western paintings, kind of. And then whenever we were not together, I would do multiples of the self, because the time moved in a weird manner when I was
Oh,
without him. This was also during COVID. So I couldn't like, I would make a picture in the same place every 15 seconds or every 30 minutes, because nothing would change except the light, and it
oh.
was still and quiet. So that was that. And I think the most recent work that I'm working on a couple of other documentaries and a few other projects.
Mm.
I've been working on this project on Muslim immigrants, where I photograph immigrants in the US from everywhere, and talk to them about their experiences. So that piece is accompanied by an audio piece, which is not on my website. It should be on it in a month. Um, and it's basically people like me talking about their experiences of what it's like when you're stereotyped, what it's like
Mm.
to face some of the prejudices. What is it that they desire? What is home, right? So that all. And the most recent one, Letters to Azan, is my second monograph that I'm working on. And that's based on my 6 years of separation from my child. And it will have letters that I have written to him, letters that my family has written to him. It will have pictures since he was born to now.
Mm.
And it is kind of like a different document that I want to leave behind. Something that he can look at when he's older. Yeah,
Mm.
so that's what I'm working on now. So I think the images now are very different than the earlier self-portrait, because now I don't have that hesitancy to be in front of the camera. I've been doing it long enough that I can actually I have started becoming a surrogate. My connection that drew me to photography was the emotional connection, right? And
Mm.
I want people to feel that emotion when they look at my work. So the images that I make are based on that very emotion. I don't want them to look at a picture that I made and say, oh, this is Lali or this is her son Adnan. I
Mm.
want them to look at it and feel that moment, feel that emotion, feel that time, or feel that separation, and so it's different. The work is very different now. And there's a lot more text in the new work that I'm making. There's a lot of video pieces without sound. I do a lot of like waves and like wind and light falling, but I don't keep any sound, because those idea and like lots of, आपको पता है पाकिस्तान में जिनको सबका देते हैं, जो काइट्स उड़ती हैं, जो उड़ती हैं,
Mm.
चीलें जिसको कहते हैं,
Mm.
lots of videos of them I've been making over the years, just because it's such a, sometimes I'll be walking and I look up at the sky, and that sense of not being at home is so pronounced.
Mm.
Because in Pakistan, when you look up, the sky is always kind of not blue, right?
Mm.
It's gray and
Mm.
foggy, and the guy. So random, like I'd be walking and I'd look up and I'm like,
Ah.
where is home? So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. And so looks like
that was a
also,
very long spiel.
I mean, no, but I mean, for all the right reasons. Um, and so it seems like there has been less and less hesitation to be in front of the camera, but also did it take a lot of um, time to sort of bring these photographs to the public as well? Because say pehle it was you, now it's your son. Like we're like all of us will see him grow up
Hmm.
through the years, like through the work whenever it's displayed.
Hmm.
Was there some like hitch inside before putting them out, or was that
Mhm.
not a problem like for you because of whatever reasons there may be?
I think there was obviously a little bit of a concern. Like I don't ever want it to be the case that Azan looks at these and says, "Mom, why did you take these?"
क्या
Right?
किया
Like,
है आपने? Yeah.
but हाँ, लेकिन हो सकता है कि 18 साल के बाद वो कहे, "अम्मी, cancel. I'm canceling you." हो सकता है वो ये कहता है. But I think it's really, I've always spoken to my son about everything. And I think that's why we have this kind of a bond too. So a lot of pictures that I make today, we talk about things. And like one of the more recent images that I made was in front of this green fence. So it's totally like sectioned off, and you see a little bit of a blue sky in the back, right? And this happened right after October 7th. I think it was October, but उसके बाद हुआ था. We were talking about Palestine and Azan बात कर रहा था और मैं उसको बता रही थी, and I came to that place and I was like, I want to take a picture. And he said, why here? And I was like, okay, look at it and tell me what you see. And he was like, it's sectioned off. And I was like, yeah, what does it make you feel? He's like, well, I don't see anything. And I was like, that, yeah. So then I took a picture and I told him, I was like, this is what I'm thinking. This is why I want to take a picture, because it kind of like that sectioning off and you don't see anything beyond except that little hope or that sliver that you're seeing. And I think that's a kind of like a metaphorical or a symbolic thing for my life with you, for life, for a lot of immigrants, for life, for Palestinians that's happening right now. So we talk about these things, and a lot of the times that the images that we make now are collaborative, where I take a picture, I say, okay, now you take one, or let's like the painting series also sort of happened when he was looking at a book, Madonna and child images, and he looked at all of them. He said, "Amma, इनमें से कोई भी आपकी तरह का नहीं लगता." I said, "बेटे, of course मेरी तरह का कोई नहीं लगता." But then it got me thinking, like, अच्छा वाकई, Madonna and child images जहाँ पे obviously हम brown Madonna की कोई तस्वीर नहीं है.
हाँ
So I was like,
हाँ.
okay, I want to just reference them and just see what happens.
Yeah.
So there's been collaboration. So I feel like the discussion has been open enough that my son knows the images that I'm making. Predominant And I also feel like since none of these images have been an exploitation of either him or me or our lives,
Yeah.
I can justify it, or in my head, I
Right,
justify it
right,
like
right.
that.
Yeah.
These are pictures of me spending time with my child and without him.
Yeah.
That's it, as simple as that. It's
Right,
a recording of time
right,
that we're together and apart.
right, right.
And
And
that's why I
some,
don't.
yeah, and some mom or any parent could be going through the challenge you're going, but also may not be going through the challenge of that you're going, and they may have their kid, with them for weeks and weeks. But I think like the sense of time passing away is very profound when one does become a parent. And I was also like, I mean, I was looking at these photographs and I was just thinking, इन तस्वीरों को कैप्चर करना कितना मुश्किल रहा होगा, बिकॉज यू वर्किंग विद अ चाइल्ड, दैट चाइल्ड इज आल्सो
Mhm.
योर्स. तो
Yeah.
आपको प्यार भी उस पे आ रहा है, बट
हाँ, और
यू
गुस्सा
नो
भी आ रहा है, सीधे हो जाओ.
गुस्सा
Why
आ
are
रहा है
you
कि तुम
smiling?
प्लीज तुम फिर हिल गए. तो
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
like I mean on a very like technical, like behind the scenes, like if you could just give us like a behind the scenes lay of the land, how
Mhm.
have you been taking these photographs, the ones with Azan? Also, I think we can also maybe talk about the dupatta series.
I think I got lucky क्योंकि रज़ान बहुत committed है
Oh,
एक सब्जेक्ट होने के लिए, मेरी फोटोग्राफी के लिए शुरू से, बचपन से लाइक
okay.
मैंने अपनी कभी भी उसके साथ की कोई तस्वीरें, लाइक आई सेड टू यू बिफोर, आई लिमिट द नंबर ऑफ पिक्चर्स आई टेक. सो दैट्स वन ऑफ द प्रैक्टिसेस, लाइक आई 5-6 से ज्यादा मैं खींचती नहीं हूँ. एंड अब तो ये हो गया कि अब आज सुबह कल कल की बात है, कल, हाँ, नो परसों, वी वेंट टू द लेक एंड बहुत फॉग थी यहाँ पे, लाहौर टाइप सी था, कुछ नजर ही नहीं आ रहा, होराइजन लाइन ही नजर आ रही लेक पे. एंड आई वाज लाइक, अच्छा, वी हैव टू डू अ पिक्चर. Can I play my game after that? I was like, yeah. I was like, but I want a picture where you're going to be on this side and I'm going to be on this side. Then there's going to be a diptych. We're going to put it together and this is what it's going to be. And he's like, okay. So he goes and stands in the frame and 3 shots, I had the picture. Like I knew, like, and पहले उसने मुझे तंग करा ना, पहले उसने कहा, अच्छा माँ, I'm going to pretend that I'm falling in the water. Why don't you take a picture like that? And I was like, "Adhan, this is not a photograph for Instagram. This is not a fun shot. This is, हम हमेशा कहते हैं, वो हर बार को कहता है, अच्छा ये काम वाली तस्वीर है. मैं कहती हूँ हाँ. वो कहता है okay. And then he's very good at it. Now तो माशाल्लाह he's 11, so उसको
Yeah,
पता
he's
है.
a big boy
Like
now.
उसको, हाँ.
So,
So it's I think when he was little, I really did not pay too much attention to what he was doing as long as he and I were together. So the expression and anything, nothing was guided. Now, the only thing that I guide him on, and sometimes we've had pictures where he is smiling as well. I don't use a lot of smiling photographs because I think they immediately become candid, cute family pictures and
Mm,
therefore a different body of work. This project, specifically Letters to Azan, is a sort of a more of a somber feel. It has
mm,
a more somber feel to it because of the heaviness that's attached to it. Because the separation that I had from my child was not only for me, it was for my entire family, right? My parents got to see my kid 10 days the entirety of last year, which is awful if you
mm.
think about it from grandparents' point of view. So I think now तो अब तो बहुत आसान है इस लिहाज से कि um, कोई डायरेक्शन नहीं मुझे उसको देनी पड़ती वो आएगा मैं कहूँगी बेटा यहाँ खड़े हो जाओ कहेगा अच्छा लाइट
Yeah.
आ रही मैं कहूँगा हाँ और तस्वीर हो जाती है
Okay.
दो तीन तस्वीरों में it's done but I think the it's a little bit harder now because I don't like forcing him so I don't like telling him what to do and I don't like forcing him so if he's not in the mood then I won't take the picture but I
Mm,
think earlier ones were so much more focused on like it was very we instinctively we are a certain way with one another which is what gives me strength, I think. And so that's how those Azan pictures have been made. As far as the self-portraiture is concerned with the dupatta picture, this was the first dupatta, very bad dupatta, because it has
It's
a certain
heavy.
weight. It's
Yeah.
heavy.
Yeah.
So I learned very quickly I would look at the wind and the temperature outside before I'd go and take a picture. So that was my reason. I was like, अच्छा आज wind इतनी है miles per hour. Okay, अगर ये वाला दुपट्टा फेंकूंगी तो हवा में ऐसे गिरेगा. And then I'll do it. And then again, I would limit the number of
Mm,
exposures. शुरू में 10-15 लिया करती थी. उसके
mm.
बाद it became like 3 to 5. And I would I typically set my camera on interval timer shooting and I make it silent. तो मुझे पता नहीं चलता कि कैमरा का क्या कर रहा है और मैंने
Okay.
उसको कमांड दी होती है कि take 10 pictures or 5 pictures every 4 seconds. So then I'll sit and say 1, 2, 3, 4 and I'll toss it and
Mm,
I'll figure it out कि दुपट्टा कैसे गिरेगा हवा कैसी है direction क्या है. And then I've been doing it since 2013. So 10 साल अगर दुपट्टे फेंकते रहो तो कुछ तो सीख ही जाओगे. कहीं तो जाके गिरेगा ना सही. You'll get a hang of it eventually, right?
तो पता है
So
कि
that's the
शिफॉन
important.
शिफॉन की एक अलग पावर है और फलाना दुपट्टा
हाँ,
इस तरह गिरेगा और
बिल्कुल,
अमेजिंग
बिल्कुल,
अमेजिंग तो
बिल्कुल.
देखते
Yeah,
रहो wonderful
that's
this is amazing Lali
बहुत ज़्यादा.
are there any books related to photography or unrelated to photography even that you want people to read to just learn about this world and images and things in a better way
I think, yeah, I think there, एक तो ये मैं photographs not taken जिसकी बात करी थी. I'm looking at all the books.
yeah.
I also really like one of my favorite go-tos is The Image of Whiteness. It's a
Okay.
fantastic book. It has all these images, but it also has like really good essays. So it's
Uh-huh.
really like it's a short book. It's not very dense. The
Uh-huh.
photographs not taken one is really good. I think Roland Barthes' Camera Lucida, I've always liked it. It's a little bit, it's very thin, but
Mm,
it's very like it's very philosophical. So for people who are interested in that, that would be great. And
mm,
I also think that just generally looking at contemporary photographers' work, most of the contemporary photographers have their monographs out. So picking up a monograph and looking at the images, looking at how they sequence work in a photo book, because photo books have been on the rise for the past 15 some years, and a lot of artists make work just to be for it to become a photographic book, which is then an object of art as well. But it's something that teaches you how images talk to one another when
mm,
they're next to one another on a page. What is sequencing? What is editing? How to get rid of images that don't work? So I mean, I read a lot, and there's too many books, but I feel like it's not for everyone. I'm an educator, so I have to constantly read these
right,
books to
right.
educate or help my students. But just starting with something very simple, like there is a BBC documentary series called The Ways of Seeing, which is really fun, like 20-30 minute short British BBC videos. And then, like, there's so much stuff on podcasts too. There
Mm,
is a great one on color photographers. So I think it's important, like particularly if you're a South Asian artist, to find your ideals who are other artists of color. Find those first. पहले आप उनका काम देखें और देखें कि वो कैसा काम बना रहे हैं, क्यों बना रहे हैं, क्या हो रहा है उनके काम से. मैं ये बिल्कुल भी नहीं कह रही आपको हर तरह का काम देखना चाहिए,
बिल्कुल
हर यू शुड बी अवेयर. लेकिन मैं ये जरूर कह रही हूँ कि अपने आइडल उन लोगों को बनाएं या उन लोगों को आइडियलाइज करें जो अम, जिनके साथ आप रिलेट कर सकते हैं ज्यादा. द
बिल्कुल.
बेस्ट थिंग इज PBS. Okay, if you go on Art 21 and you listen to these 13-15 minute videos, पीछे लगाओ बैकग्राउंड में उनकी आर्टिस्टिक प्रैक्टिस सुनो लोगों की, you learn a lot. Those are
Amazing.
incredible.
Amazing.
मतलब,
But
yeah.
Lali, thank you so much for taking out so much time.
Thank you.
Uh,
Yeah, thank you so much.